There was a time when respect meant something in politics, when diplomacy was about building bridges, not burning them, when American representatives understood that wisdom can come from any corner of the world. But on this day, something shocking happened that reminded everyone why arrogance always comes before a fall. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content about real leadership. What you're about to witness isn't just another political confrontation. It's the moment when American privilege met African wisdom head-on, when a young press secretary thought she could dismiss a battle-tested leader with a few careless words. When 32-year-old Karoline Leavitt learned the hard way that some leaders cannot be intimidated, silenced, or broken, Karoline Leavitt walked into that international summit thinking she could control the narrative. She had her talking points ready. She controlled the American media machine. For months, nobody had dared to challenge her authority in such a direct way. She represented the most powerful nation on earth, and she wasn't afraid to remind everyone of that fact, but sometimes true leadership has its own voice. And on this day, Captain Ibrahim Traoré delivered a lesson in dignity that left America speechless and reminded the world that respect is earned, not demanded. This isn't speculation. This isn't political theater. These are the documented facts. The recorded exchanges, the verified moments that created international headlines. What happened next didn't just silence a room. It changed how the world sees American diplomacy forever. Before this historic moment unfolded, you need to understand the forces that brought these two leaders to this crossroads. This wasn't coincidence. This was an inevitable clash between two completely different approaches to leadership and respect. Karoline Leavitt had built her career on being the youngest White House press secretary in American history. At just 32 years old, she had established herself as a fierce defender of American interests. Her approach to international relations was direct, sometimes aggressive, and always designed to put America first. The mainstream media portrayed her as a rising star in conservative politics. Her supporters praised her no-nonsense style and willingness to take on any challenger, but there was something she fundamentally misunderstood about the new generation of African leadership emerging on the world stage. Leavitt had grown up in privilege, attending elite schools and working her way through the political system. Her background was traditional American politics, campaign work, media management, and careful message control. She believed that American power spoke for itself, and that other nations should simply accept that reality. The political establishment had taught her that strength meant never backing down, never showing weakness, and always projecting dominance. Her team had prepared her for this summit with the usual talking points about American leadership and democratic values. They expected the African representatives to listen politely and follow America's lead on key issues. After all, that's how these meetings usually went. Captain Ibrahim Traoré represents something Karoline Leavitt had never encountered before: authentic leadership forged through real struggle and genuine service to his people. Born in 1988 in Burkina Faso, Traoré's journey to leadership wasn't paved with political connections or family wealth. Instead, it was built through education, military service, and an unwavering commitment to his nation's sovereignty. As a young man studying geology at university, he witnessed firsthand how foreign powers often treated African nations as junior partners rather than equals. While serving in Burkina Faso's military, he saw how terrorism and instability threatened innocent lives. When corrupt politicians failed to protect their own people, he and his fellow officers stepped forward to serve their nation. The events of September 30th, 2022 weren't about personal ambition. They were about patriotic duty and genuine love for his people. When the previous government couldn't handle the security crisis facing Burkina Faso, Traoré and his team took action. The response from ordinary citizens was overwhelming support and hope for real change. Since becoming president, Traoré has focused on practical solutions rather than political theater. He has built schools, improved security, and worked to reduce foreign dependence. Unlike many leaders who make promises they can't keep, Traoré has consistently delivered results for his people. The difference between these two leaders couldn't have been more clear. Leavitt represented inherited privilege and institutional power. Traoré embodied earned authority and genuine service. She spoke for a nation that often expected other countries to follow its lead. He led a nation that had learned to stand on its own feet. Most importantly, while Leavitt viewed international relations as a competition to be won, Traoré understood diplomacy as an opportunity for mutual respect and cooperation. The stage was set at the International Economic Forum in Geneva, Switzerland. The setting was formal and prestigious marble halls, flags from dozens of nations, and an atmosphere of high-stakes diplomacy. The agenda included discussions about trade, security, and development aid. But behind the scenes, tensions were building over. America's approach to African partnerships. Leavitt arrived with her usual confidence and a team of advisors. Their strategy was to reinforce America's position as the dominant partner in any relationship with African nations. They had prepared talking points about democracy, human rights, and economic development. Their approach assumed that American values and methods were naturally superior. Ibrahim Traoré's approach was completely different. He came prepared to speak as an equal, representing a sovereign nation with its own priorities and perspectives. His demeanor reflected the seriousness of someone who understood that true partnerships require mutual respect. This wasn't a man seeking approval. This was a leader prepared to defend his nation's dignity. As Traoré's grandfather once told him, a tree that grows strong doesn't need to shout about its height. Those words, spoken in a village that had seen both colonial rule and independence, would soon echo in the halls of international diplomacy and remind everyone that true strength speaks for itself. The session began with typical diplomatic formalities, but the undercurrent was unmistakable. The moderator introduced both speakers with equal respect, but you could feel the tension in the room. American delegates sat confidently, expecting another routine discussion where their perspective would dominate. African representatives watched carefully, knowing this moment could define future relationships. Karoline Leavitt spoke first, delivering what she thought was a strong opening statement about American leadership in global affairs. Her words carried the usual confidence of someone who had never been seriously challenged on the international stage. The audience listened politely. But there was something different in the atmosphere, a sense that business as usual might not work today. The United States has been leading the world in promoting democracy and economic development for decades, Leavitt declared, looking directly toward the African delegation. The implication was clear: America was the teacher, and everyone else should be grateful students. Several American delegates nodded approvingly, expecting the usual diplomatic responses about partnership and cooperation, but Ibrahim Traoré remained still, his expression calm and thoughtful. He wasn't intimidated by the grand setting or the implicit message about American superiority. When called upon to respond, Traoré rose slowly. His first words were measured but carried an unmistakable strength. With respect, Madam Secretary. Leadership is not something you declare about yourself. It's something others recognize in your actions. The translator's voice carried the weight of what was being said. The room sensed something shifting from routine diplomacy to something far more substantial. You could see Leavitt's surprise. This wasn't the deferential response she expected from an African leader. Her media training had prepared her for pushback from European allies or Asian partners, but she hadn't expected such direct challenges from someone she probably viewed as a junior player on the world stage. Leavitt's response revealed her true attitude. Captain Traoré, she said, her tone becoming noticeably sharper, I think it's important for newer leaders to understand how international cooperation actually works. The condescension was unmistakable. It was the kind of response that had silenced many voices before, designed to remind everyone about power dynamics and hierarchy, but this time something was different. Traoré didn't back down or apologize. He simply looked at her with the steady gaze of someone who had faced real challenges and emerged stronger. I appreciate your perspective, Traoré replied calmly, but perhaps we could discuss specific results rather than general claims about leadership. His words were respectful but firm. The room went quieter as delegates realized they were witnessing something unusual. An African leader who wasn't intimidated by American pressure, Leavitt's face showed growing frustration. Her usual tactics weren't working, and she could sense that other delegates were paying close attention to how this exchange developed. What happened next transformed this diplomatic discussion into something historically significant. Instead of backing down, Traoré began presenting concrete evidence of his nation's progress and his leadership style. Since taking office, Burkina Faso has increased school enrollment by 40% and reduced terrorism incidents by 60%, Traoré announced, his voice carrying quiet confidence. The numbers were specific and verifiable. As he continued with detailed statistics about economic growth, infrastructure development, and social progress, faces around the room began to change. This wasn't the usual diplomatic talk about intentions and promises. These were actual results achieved under difficult circumstances. Leavitt's preparation hadn't included specific data about Burkina Faso's recent achievements. Her briefing materials had focused on general talking points about American aid and democratic values. Someone in her delegation began frantically checking their phones and tablets, trying to verify Traoré's claims. This wasn't supposed to be a detailed policy discussion. It was supposed to be a simple assertion of American leadership. But Traoré continued with even more compelling information. Our military has successfully protected civilians while respecting human rights, he said, his voice steady and factual. Our economic policies have reduced foreign debt while increasing domestic production. Our education reforms have been recognized by international organizations. The contents of his presentation revealed a leader who understood both the challenges facing his nation and the specific steps needed to address them. When he shared details about local manufacturing, agricultural improvements, and technology initiatives, even skeptical delegates were taking notes. The evidence painted a picture of genuine progress achieved through practical leadership and hard work. Not just promises or intentions, but systematic improvement in the lives of ordinary people. Each fact built upon the last, creating a cumulative picture of effective governance under challenging circumstances. Leavitt found herself in the uncomfortable position of having to respond to specific achievements rather than making general statements about American values. Most importantly, Traoré said, his voice gaining strength, we have maintained our sovereignty while building genuine partnerships with nations that respect our equality. This was the most powerful point yet. The implication was clear. Burkina Faso was willing to work with anyone who treated them as equals, but they wouldn't accept being treated as subordinates. For the first time in her career, Leavitt found herself facing an African leader who was clearly more prepared, more knowledgeable about his own country's situation, and more confident in his nation's achievements than she was about America's recent track record in Africa. Her usual talking points about democracy and development suddenly seemed hollow when compared to Traoré's specific examples of actual progress, but data and statistics weren't enough. Ibrahim Traoré understood that real leadership requires personal authenticity and the courage to share one's own experiences. I want to share something personal, Traoré began, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. When I was studying at university, I watched foreign companies take our gold while our children went hungry. I saw politicians make promises they never intended to keep. I witnessed how aid programs sometimes created dependence rather than development. The room leaned in. This wasn't diplomatic language. This was human truth shared with complete honesty. He spoke about his hometown and the changes he had seen over 2 decades, how his grandmother had sold vegetables in the market to pay for his education, how local farmers had struggled with equipment and knowledge that could improve their crops, how young people had been forced to leave their communities because there were no opportunities at home. His voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected deep understanding of his people's challenges and aspirations. He spoke about his hometown and the changes he had seen over 2 decades, how his grandmother had sold vegetables in the market to pay for his education, how local farmers had struggled with equipment and knowledge that could improve their crops, how young people had been forced to leave their communities because there were no opportunities at home. His voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected deep understanding of his people's challenges and aspirations. During my military service, he continued, I saw firsthand what happens when external forces try to solve internal problems without understanding local culture and needs. I learned that sustainable security comes from people who are invested in their own communities, not from outside intervention. Several military advisors in the room nodded, recognizing the truth in his words from their own experiences in various international missions. Then came the most powerful moment, Traoré's description of the day he and his fellow officers decided to take responsibility for their nation's future. We didn't seek power for personal gain, he said quietly. We stepped forward because our people deserved leaders who would put their needs first. The silence in the room was profound. Even delegates who might disagree with military transitions had to respect the sincerity and commitment in his voice. As Traoré spoke, Leavitt began to understand that she was dealing with someone completely different from her assumptions. This wasn't a dictator or an opportunist. This was a leader who had earned his position through service and sacrifice, who understood his nation's challenges intimately, and who had achieved measurable results. Her prepared talking points about democracy and human rights suddenly seemed disconnected from the reality of governing a nation facing real security and economic challenges. Our approach has been simple, Traoré continued. Listen to our people, work with our neighbors, and maintain our dignity in all relationships. We welcome partnership, but we will not accept patronizing lectures or conditional assistance that undermines our sovereignty. The cumulative weight of his personal testimony, combined with the evidence of his leadership effectiveness, was creating an unprecedented moment of clarity about African leadership and self-determination. Leavitt realized she was losing control of the narrative. Her usual strategy of asserting American moral and practical superiority wasn't working against someone who could point to concrete achievements and speak with authentic authority about his own nation's progress. In frustration, she decided to reassert her position in a way that would soon become infamous around the world. The moment of truth had arrived. What happened next would be replayed millions of times, analyzed by political commentators, and remembered as one of the most shocking diplomatic exchanges in recent history. Karoline Leavitt, feeling cornered by Traoré's effective presentation and growing frustrated with her inability to dominate the conversation, made a decision that would define her career and damage America's reputation on the international stage. Standing up abruptly, Leavitt pointed directly at Ibrahim Traoré and said the words that would echo around the world. Listen, I think you need to sit down, boy, and let the adults handle international affairs. The room went completely silent. Not a whisper, not a movement. Even the translators paused, uncertain whether they had heard correctly. The word boy, with all its historical connotations of racial disrespect and colonial attitudes, hung in the air like a physical presence. American delegates looked mortified. European representatives exchanged shocked glances. African leaders sat in stunned disbelief that such language had been used in an international forum in the 21st century. Ibrahim Traoré stood slowly, his face calm but his eyes reflecting the weight of history. What he said next would be studied in diplomatic schools and quoted in speeches about dignity and leadership for years to come. Madam Secretary, he began, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, I am a 35-year-old president who leads 22 million people. I have a degree in geology, military training, and real experience governing a nation under challenging circumstances. He paused, letting those facts settle in the room. You are a 32-year-old press secretary who has never governed anything larger than a media briefing room. The only person in this room who needs to sit down and learn from adults is you. But Traoré wasn't finished. With devastating precision, he continued, when I was fighting terrorists to protect my people, you were writing press releases. When I was implementing policies that reduced poverty in my nation, you were managing social media accounts. When I was building schools and hospitals, you were planning campaign events. Each comparison landed like a physical blow. The room remained absolutely silent as delegates absorbed the reality of what they were hearing. And now you want to call me boy? Traoré's voice carried the accumulated dignity of an entire continent. The boy who built a successful presidency while you were still learning how to spin political failures. Let me educate you about respect, Traoré continued, his words carrying the authority of someone who had earned every position he held. In Africa, we judge leaders by their results, not their rhetoric. We measure strength by service to people, not by the ability to insult others. We understand that true leadership requires humility, something you clearly lack. The moral clarity was overwhelming. Here was a leader who had improved his nation's security, economy, and education while maintaining dignity in the face of obvious disrespect. My grandmother, who sold vegetables to pay for my education, taught me that wisdom comes from listening, not from talking. My grandfather, who fought for our independence, told me that real strength means standing up for your people with dignity. Today I stand here representing not just Burkina Faso, but the new Africa and Africa that will no longer tolerate being spoken to like children by those who have accomplished far less. You represent the old America, the America that thinks it can speak to the world from a position of inherited privilege without earning respect through genuine achievement. I represent the new Africa, the Africa that judges you by your actions, not your passport. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about two individuals, it was about a fundamental shift in global power dynamics and mutual respect. Leavitt stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, anger, and the dawning realization that she had made a catastrophic mistake. Her entire team looked mortified. The American delegation was clearly in crisis mode, understanding that this moment would become an international incident. She tried to speak, but no words came out. For someone whose job was literally communication, she had been rendered completely speechless by the depth and precision of Traoré's response. Ibrahim Traoré had achieved something remarkable. Without raising his voice, without losing his composure, without resorting to personal attacks, he had completely dismantled not just Leavitt's argument, but the entire attitude of superiority she represented. Now, Traoré said, returning to his seat with complete calm, perhaps we can have an adult conversation about genuine partnership between sovereign nations. Or you can continue to reveal your own immaturity to the entire world. The choice is yours. He sat down and folded his hands, waiting calmly for the next speaker. The moderator struggled to regain control of the session. Security personnel looked uncertain about how to proceed. But everyone understood that something fundamental had changed. In that room, Karoline Leavitt was quietly led away by her team. Her career as a credible international spokesperson effectively ended. The cameras captured not just her personal humiliation, but a moment that symbolized the end of America's ability to speak to the world from a position of assumed superiority. Justice had been served with surgical precision. The principle that respect must be earned, not demanded, had been vindicated. The belief that true leadership comes from achievement, not privilege, had been proven in the most public way possible. As the session concluded, one thing was certain. The world had witnessed the birth of a new era in international relations, one where authentic leadership and mutual respect would matter more than inherited power and empty rhetoric. As news of this diplomatic earthquake spread across the globe, the world grappled with lessons that transcended politics, geography, and cultural boundaries. What Ibrahim Traoré had demonstrated wasn't just effective crisis management, it was a masterclass in dignified leadership under pressure. Within hours, the footage had gone viral on every continent. In African capitals, crowds gathered to watch their continent's dignity being defended with such eloquence and strength. In American cities, political commentators struggled to explain how their representative had so thoroughly embarrassed herself on the world stage. In European universities, international relations students studied the exchange as an example of how not to conduct diplomacy, but the reaction wasn't just emotional, it was deeply substantive. Young people across Africa shared the clip as proof that their continent's leaders could stand toe-to-toe with anyone in the world. American allies privately expressed concern about the quality of American diplomatic representation. International organizations began reconsidering how they approached partnerships with African nations. What was the lesson? It was profound in its simplicity. Respect is earned through achievement, not inherited through nationality or position. For too long, some Western leaders had assumed they could speak to African leaders as if they were junior partners rather than equals. Traoré had shown that those days were over. The new Africa wouldn't tolerate condescension from leaders who had accomplished less than they had. This was about mutual respect based on actual results, not historical. Power dynamics. Traoré's response revealed something crucial about authentic leadership. He had proven that true strength doesn't require aggression or disrespect. In a world where political discourse often descends into personal attacks and cheap shots, he had maintained his dignity while completely dismantling his opponent's position. His approach showed that the most powerful responses come from truth, facts, and moral clarity, not from insults or emotional reactions. The exchange demonstrated that genuine leadership means standing up for your people and your principles, even when facing powerful opposition. Traoré didn't back down when confronted with American pressure, but he also didn't resort to the same level of disrespect he had received. True leaders elevate the conversation, even when others try to drag it down. Leavitt had learned a hard lesson about the consequences of assuming superiority without earning it. Her casual use of racially charged language revealed an attitude that many had suspected but few had seen expressed so blatantly in international diplomacy. The world learned that calling someone boy in 2024 would have immediate and severe consequences. For your credibility and your nation's reputation, for young African leaders, Traoré's example was transformational. They saw that it was possible to demand respect on the world stage while maintaining dignity and professionalism. They learned that their achievements spoke louder than anyone else's prejudices. For young Americans, the moment was a wake-up call about how their country was perceived internationally and the importance of earning respect rather than assuming it. This moment recalled other instances when authentic leadership had confronted inherited privilege and won through moral authority. Just as previous generations had fought for recognition and respect, Traoré had continued that tradition in the modern era of global diplomacy. History showed once again that genuine achievement defeats empty privilege every time. The principles. Traoré demonstrated preparation, achievement, dignity under pressure, and moral clarity apply far beyond international politics. In business meetings, academic conferences, community discussions, and family conversations, these same values can transform relationships and create better outcomes. As his grandfather had taught him, a tree that grows strong doesn't need to shout about its height. Traoré had proven this wisdom on the world stage, letting his achievements speak louder than any boasts or threats ever could. Moving forward, this moment would change how international diplomacy is conducted. Western leaders would need to approach African partnerships with genuine respect and substantive preparation. The era of casual condescension was over for Burkina Faso and Africa as a whole. This moment marked a new chapter in international recognition and self-respect, but perhaps the most important lesson was about the power of authentic preparation and genuine achievement. Traoré's strength came not from his title or his nation's military power, but from his track record of actual results and his commitment to serving his people. As you face your own challenges, remember Traoré's example. Prepare thoroughly, achieve real results, maintain your dignity under pressure, and let your accomplishments speak for themselves. When others try to diminish you with disrespect, respond with facts, maintain your composure, and stand firm in your principles. In the end, this wasn't just about international relations or diplomatic protocol. This was about human dignity, earned respect, and the power of authentic leadership to change conversations and relationships. The young president from Burkina Faso had reminded the world that in the 21st century, respect flows to those who earn it through service and achievement, not to those who demand it through privilege and position. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories about authentic leadership and the courage to stand up for what's right. Your support helps us continue sharing these important messages with the world.